It was just changing.
Looks like we're live. Hello.
Yes, and we are live. So, how's everybody doing?
Looks like we're live.
You bet.
This will be the latest stream I've ever done. It's literally. What was that?
Ask us anything.
Ask us anything.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, hey, how you doing? You all right, Neil?
I think we're back. Yeah. Did you have a good time, Ben, at the rest of the conference?
Did we just start again?
Yeah, we're alive now. We just had to redo that for, what do you call it? I guess it's called repetition for emphasis.
I see. Marcus, how are you today?
I'm very well, thanks.
Yeah, I was just looking at one of the older videos, the Great Moon Hoax, the documentary.
Oh, yeah.
And you are featured in that, right?
Okay.
It has 8 million views now.
Really?
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Well, it just shows that people are starting to pay attention, aren't they?
Well, I think that's one of the reasons why all of your other presentations, okay, that they've removed them, because you're in that documentary and they don't want to hear you finish your sentences off. Like they gave you a little clip of you in there saying that you're denying the moon landings, and then of course they're trying to prove that it actually happened in that documentary, right?
I know.
Yeah.
And if people came to Apollo Detectives, they'd find out a lot more of the detail of it.
But it also credited you with Nexus Magazine in that as well. So you got 8 million views for Nexus Magazine there.
This is so important.
Yes. Well, we got them up here too.
Current issue, chaps, just out in the US.
Yeah.
Ah, brilliant. I've got mine. It has arrived in the post, yeah. As
That's
always.
Good. Yeah. Good magazine.
Still running my ad in there, which is nice.
Well, I hope it gets sales.
It must have do. Yeah, it must. I mean, there's nowhere better to advertise it. There's nowhere more appropriate for my particular book, to have it advertised there.
That's true. It's a good point to make.
Yeah.
There's some interesting people who read it as well, including the UK government. I know they do.
Well, they like to keep their friends close, enemies closer, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Randy!
Hey, Randy.
Hi, Randy.
Hi, Randy.
Good to see you.
Yeah, good to see you, all of you too.
Well, trying to work out. Oh, here we go.
I'm just looking in the comments.
Streaming a bit.
Anybody
the
that
streaming,
wishes
I
to
think.
ask us a question, just post it in the
Here
comment,
he is.
and we'll be able to answer them for you.
Mark Wigler says, did the Apollo missions ever explore the craters? If they allegedly did, why didn't they show the shade from the crater shadow? That's a good point. I've never thought of that.
Join the chat.
The shade from within the shadow. So they visited the crater on Apollo 12, right?
Yeah.
And then you
According
can
to the Via
supposedly,
crater.
right, and you can see the shadow supposedly adjusting a little bit between EVA 1 and EVA 2.
I know that Apollo 13 was supposed to be at the Fra Mauro, which at that time was actually in twilight, which could have made the landing very difficult, considering there's no lights which an aircraft has, So, but of course, it didn't matter, because what happened on Apollo 13, everyone forgot about that, didn't they?
Yeah, that's why Mary and David's book is called Dark Moon, based on that landing location.
They've seen him on cover, with he's literally only just over in the daylight side.
Yeah. But seeing as the capsule came down in the Atlantic next day, picked up by the Soviet Navy, It wasn't going to go anywhere to the moon, and it didn't.
Yeah, here's a question in the comments here.
Yeah.
How does one become 1/10 the awesomeness of Mr. Allen? Awesomeness.
There you go.
That's I can't even pronounce how he said.
Here's the answer to Jason's question. Jason Delano. I haven't read Al Warden's book, but all the SR-71 pilots flying at 80,000 feet, 15 miles up, said the stars were so bright they could read their instrument panel with the internal lights turned off. So stars are certainly visible from space.
Yep.
80,000.
Sorry, Max, I was going to say, it backs it up. Area 51, The Uncensored History of America's Top Secret Military Base by Annie Jacobson. It has an interview with another pilot who says exactly the same.
Yeah.
So it's not just a one-off.
No.
I've got Alexei Leonov's book that he co-wrote with David Scott. They both took turns writing about their respective missions, and Alexei Leonov claims to have seen stars on the daylight side of the Earth during his Vostok mission, which of course that's also open to discussion, considering that it was confirmed that some of the spacewalk footage was faked. They, in fact, even Jim Oberg actually went so far as to say, "Oh, well, yeah, they faked some of the footage on Vostok, but the Russians, they were very careless in how they labeled all their footage, which was flight footage, which was training footage, which was simulations, and yada yada yada."
Yeah. Dear oh dear, it's a bit sad the way they get all these stories conflicted. Because when you get SR-71 pilots saying throughout their missions, they could see these incredible canopies of stars, and yet none of the Apollo astronauts could, but the SR-71 program was being developed at the same time as Apollo. The same situation. I mean, they were developing the SR-71 at the same time they were developing the Apollo program.
This is an aircraft that flies over 60,000 feet, which is incredibly higher than any aircraft at the time. The A-12 Oxcart, which is like the CIA equivalent of the SR-71, had similar capabilities. Again, it's once you get that high, the sky does turn black, and you can see stars.
Somebody asked a question in the comments here. She said that if it's a he, they said if they were supposedly using the windows to navigate and look through the stars, or even if they use that periscope thing to navigate, would they have to stop the barbecue roll in order to have a long enough time to use the stars to navigate by?
Good question.
That's a good
If
point.
I recall correctly, supposedly they only stopped the barbecue roll for when it was time to do, television transmissions. That's what I remember reading somewhere.
Yeah. So many anomalies in this story, aren't there? So many anomalies.
They'd have to stop it if they were mapping the lunar surface as well.
Yes, there was another one from Sean McHugh. Would moon rocks be too hot to pick up without melting gloves, or would they be too hot to pick up altogether?
No, I don't think it would be too hot to pick up the gloves without them melting. I think because it's, if I recall, it's only heated to about 100 degrees Celsius. That's the boiling point of water. So
Right, because they chose the Apollo missions to be landing on the coldest point of the moon at the coldest time in the moon, right when the sun was rising.
Yeah.
So if they would have done longer missions and the surface would have heated up, then definitely it would have burnt through the gloves and the boots and everything else.
Well, also, whenever sunlight strikes an object on the moon, it immediately heats up. There's no atmosphere like we have on Earth, where things take a little while to become hot during the day, when the sunlight hits an object, whether it's a spacecraft or a rock, it immediately acquires the temperature of that radiation. In other words, 120 odd degrees centigrade. Whether it's just after dawn, the sunlight may appear to be a little bit low, but it doesn't mean to say that the radiant energy of it is any less than it would be if it was high. So yes,
I was just going to add to that comment there, because I remembered there was an ad earlier. I was watching some YouTube videos earlier. There was actually an ad for a masterclass that the astronaut Chris Hadfield was doing. I remembered him saying something about when you're in the spacesuit, you have one side of the suit that's really, really hot, that's facing the sun, the other side that feels really, really cold. It's a weird juxtaposition. Something to that extent, he said.
Yeah.
Also, somebody mentioned that Charlie Duke, Apollo 16, said he could see the photograph he placed down start shriveling. Is that true from Charlie Duke's biography? When he placed the photo on the surface, he could see it warming up and drying out and shriveling.
I haven't seen his biography. I'd have to check that one out. I've got quite a few astronaut biographies with me at the moment. I've got Carrying the Fire right here. I've got that Two Sides of the Moon book that I showed you a moment ago. There's several stacked away elsewhere. But yeah, I got stacks and stacks of astronaut biographies, and it's quite interesting to comb through all these things. Cross compare what these people are claiming.
There's certainly nothing in the visual record that indicates that. The photograph was taken actually shows it looking perfectly normal, lying there as if it's on a normal cool surface. I know that Andrew Johnson, a British researcher, actually did an experiment with one of his own family photographs by putting it in the oven at 80 degrees centigrade to see what would happen. And as to be expected, considering it's paper and photographic chemicals, it was scorched, it curled up, and the image was lost very, very quickly. Almost immediately exposed to that heat.
But that was convection. See, that was the other thing that people were saying that was wrong about that, because you put it in an oven and it's convection that's going to do the most damage because of the heat radiating through convection. But it still is going to radiate through radiation if it's laying on the actual surface of the moon like it was.
It was on a hot surface, and it's in sunlight. Yeah. I mean, Andrew, in case of Andrew's oven experiment, it was hot air basically, which was exposed to hot air in the oven.
Yeah.
We have Dan. We have Dan Nichols.
But he still had time to take a photograph of it on the.
I wanted to talk a little about this temperature problem. Okay, so the surface temperature of the moon ranges between negative 200 to positive 250. But it's going to take 13 days for it to go from negative 200 all the way up to positive 250. Okay, so this means the surface temperature. If you stick a thermometer in the ground, okay, that's what we're talking about. So it's going to be due to the radiation it's absorbing from the sun. It's going to warm up, but quite slowly, actually. It's going to take 13 days to go from maximum cool to maximum heat.
There are documents on that, and I fully disagree with them.
But then we have Dan Nichols.
They're basing it on the same profile as what you find on Earth. And what you have on Earth is a diffusion of light through the atmosphere. Okay. And that's quite a bit different than being directly lit on the surface of the moon with sunlight.
And as for Dan Nichols here, like he says, are there any published data on results of radiation on Helge and Zor? Now, Raza, you had something on that, didn't you?
Yeah, they released the radiation readings from the Artemis 1 mission, right? And you can see, that they turned on the recording equipment as they passed through the Van Allen belt and then onto the way around the moon and coming back, but then they turned off the equipment coming back through the Van Allen belt. But you could see the supposed peak as they passed through the Van Allen belt, and then also you could see the radiation dip down when they pulled in closer to the lunar surface. This is what you would expect. Now, what do those readings mean? Actually, can we actually compare these things to the Apollo missions or not?
I remember the data. I think you're talking about the Hera data. I believe the question was asking.
This is an interesting thing.
Yeah, but I was just going to say, I believe that it was. I believe that.
I'll just say this, which I found on it.
What's that?
Go on, Jared.
You playing something?
I was just going to say, I remember the data that was released was by the Hera data, which was I forget what the acronym stands for off the top of my head, but basically it was these bunch of sensors they planted around the capsule. I believe the question was specifically about the mannequins that they had there. I'm not sure if they released that data there, but the data, I believe the one that Raza was talking about, it shows that that even with, keep in mind, the Orion spacecraft has about 20 grams per square centimeter of shielding on it. That's about nearly 3 times as much as the Apollo spacecraft. And on top of that, these detectors, they've got little shield of water around them as well, and they're still picking up readings that are higher than what the Apollo received, what the Apollo supposedly received. In fact, I got the paper in question here. The paper is called HERA. That's HERA, a time peak-based radiation detection system for exoplanet exploration class space missions. HERA is a hybrid electronic radiation accessor.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting how they confuse the documentation all the time.
I assume by now we would have more information because the 4 guys they selected for the mission haven't gone yet, have they? For the next Artemis mission, they're still on the Earth waiting for the launch.
I did a video about that, how they had already announced the crew without even getting the data back. I was actually at the press conference when they were, really talking about all the data they've got. All the press wanted to talk about was the heat shield, and I was literally the only one in the teleconference to ask a question about the radiation. I was watching the solar activity. I was watching all the reports. There was 3 coronal mass ejections during the Artemis 1 mission, and when I literally asked the guy, I believe his name was Howard Hugh, the program manager, I asked what was the data from those the radiation detectors. How well did the cabin shield against the solar flares? His response was basically, you know more about those flares than I do.
No, I mean, Jared, that's a compliment.
So what were you going to say, Neil? Do you wanted to add something?
Where's he gone?
Hey, Neil,
He seems to have
are
frozen.
you still there?
Someone asked a question about the SR-71.
Yeah, I was just saying, I've just been. I was looking at the data for the 2 dummies, and this is from the ESA blogs talking about it, and various people have posted on there. And this is dated March 2023, and basically the final sound, it says some data could be restricted, but eventually most will be released in scientific journals. The data is going to be gathered between space agencies and universities from around the world, and it will all eventually be subsequently published, but some data could be restricted, and I don't know why that is, but there we go. That's what it says there, which is interesting.
Why would there need to be a delay and restriction?
So yeah,
They're probably talking about the cancer research, because they had human tissues inside of one of the dummies, and so they're going to do a cancer risk assessment to that human tissue. So that's probably what they're withholding right now.
Right.
I see. I noticed John C. from South Australia has asked a question.
Right.
I noticed the Polaris Dawn mission has been delayed indefinitely. Are you surprised? I'm not. Any thoughts on this? Well, the Polaris Dawn has been delayed for quite a number of reasons, and the latest one being is that is that the barge ship that they were supposed to recover the boosters, that got damaged, I believe, by the when on the previous Falcon 9 launch. It was supposed to make a soft landing on the I think it was called, of course I still love you, the barge, and it landed down very hard, crushed its landing legs and toppled over and blew up. So obviously now they can't get the boosters back from Polaris Dawn when not in the near future anyways. But another thing we'll say about Polaris Dawn, I've actually been kind of distressed by some of the things I've been seeing posted in social media about this particular mission. And also in the media, what they keep saying about it, they keep hyping that this is going to be a flight into the Van Allen belt. Well, this is a very misleadingly stated. For all intents and purposes, the Polaris Dawn is essentially a repeat of Gemini 11. For the longest time, I was actually very confused by Gemini 11 because I know Phil Plait and Jay Windley, they both like to exaggerate this mission. They were interested in its 1,300-kilometer altitude. Oh, this one went into the Van Allen belt, and they proved that they could survive. In fact, Plait actually embellished the story, saying, "Oh, they went in there and they went into the heart of the belt and stayed there for a long time." No, that's not what they did at all. If you actually look at the data, the Gemini 11, all it did, it made 2 highly elliptical orbits, which basically took it through the innermost edge of the belt. It's not like if you were to step off the edge of a pool and straight into the deep end. It's like if you were to enter the pool from the shallow end and gradually, you walk further into things. So basically, to get through the belts all the way, that would be like getting into the shallow end and walking all the way to the deep end, right? Well, Gemini, all they did, literally, metaphorically speaking, all they did was just skim the shallowmost edge of the pool, in this case, the pool of radiation, then come back out again. They only did this twice on 2 highly elliptical orbits, right? And so it's really an apples and oranges fallacy. All the other Gemini flights, the best they could hope to reach was the South Atlantic anomaly, which, again, is much, much lower than what the Apollo astronauts would have been said to have gone through. And so I've been very, very distressed seeing all these posts in the media, and of course all these posts on social media. There's people wondering if this is going to be a suicide flight or if this is going to be another hoax. Well, no. You need context matters. That's pretty much the take-home message. Context matters, and this is not what they claimed they did on Apollo. On Apollo, they claimed they've gone all the way through the belts, right? And I've actually got the coordinates from the Apollo missions, the Apollo 11 mission. I plugged those into the AP8 data, which is the AP8 is the industry standard model for the Van Allen fluxes, and I find that the dose would have been in the order of 100 rads. Okay. Now, for comparison, on Gemini 11, that when they went on these 2 high elliptical orbits, they said they were only detecting something like 0.3 rads per hour. So, as I said, it's literally just the shallow end of the pool, and so it's you have to travel much, much higher in altitude before you start getting doses in the order of 10s to 100 rads per hour.
Yeah, good point.
Jara, I got a question for Jara. Jara, you're just to follow up on Gemini. Which Gemini was that? Which one are you talking about?
Gemini 11.
Gemini 11.
Yes.
Now, I'm correct in saying that the inner Van Allen belt is proton dominated?
Correct.
So I'm just curious to why NASA would even bother, considering that the Apollo missions were supposedly have gone through the electron-dominated outer belt. So why would he even bother? I've read literature too about the inner belt, saying that it's pretty well lethal to astronauts if they go through that. So I'm just wondering what their official reason was for sending a manned mission or Gemini 11 rather through the proton dominated, when they wouldn't actually want to get more data on the electron dominated outer belt.
Well, you'd think that they would want to send them much higher into the proton belt to get some proper data. In fact, one of the missions on Apollo, one of the cancelled missions, was they had the missions based on A, B, C, et cetera, et cetera. I think it was the D-type mission. No, was it the D-type mission? I can't remember the numbers off the top of my head. It's very late, but basically they had a mission which was supposed to take them up into medium Earth orbit, basically the space between the 2 belts, and that was intended for Apollo 8. That was when they cancelled it, of course, and they made Apollo 8 a lunar orbit mission, supposedly. But when it comes to the electron belt, when I did my calculations, I could only use the proton data, and that is because the AP8 or the AE8, we have an AP8 for the protons and an AE8 for the electrons. The AE8 only goes up to 7 mega electron volts, and those kinds of electrons are stopped within the commander module. If the radiation the electron radiation you got to worry about is the electrons of energies greater than 15 mega electron volts. These are what they tend to call killer electrons. These are particularly prevalent during ejection events. There was the CRESS incident, which over replenished the belts with these greater than 15 MeV electrons. But they're typically observed around 5 Earth radii. And but the problem is, you see, they're very, very hard to measure. You see, the reason being is that when the more energy means the further the proton or the electron can penetrate through the detector. And in the case of really high energetic particles, they travel all the way through and only deposit a tiny fraction of their energy. And so for every particle you're detecting, there's probably 1,000 or many thousands more that you're not detecting, because they just don't detect very well. To get a more thorough measurement, you would need to launch a very, very big detector into space, and big, of course, means heavy. Heavy means expensive to launch, and so most of the detectors that they have are much smaller than what would be ideal. And so,
Jared, could I interrupt for a minute?
Go ahead.
The audience probably would like to hear how many rads per hour it takes to kill somebody.
Well, you need about 500 rads in any short time to kill people. Although this is kind of debatable. Van Allen himself, James Van Allen, actually stated that about 10 Roentgens over 2 days would only give you an even chance of survival. That's about 10 Roentgens is about 13.7 rads. And so he says over 2 days they will be only give an even chance of survival. In this book here, let me just get it out here. In this book here that I got, Prospects for Interstellar Travel, Malden mentions that to kill a human in any short time, you need something in the order of 500 rads. If you receive it over a lifetime, like over many decades, you probably won't die instantaneously, but that will lead to a cancerous future. It depends on the time frames of how quickly you're receiving this kind of radiation.
So,
Jared,
in other words, what you're
question
already
for you.
reading is quite deadly.
There's so many people.
Well, I'll tell you something. Can anybody? This is one question here that is, I think, is interesting. So, why is Apollo 11 in those? Remember the three? He had the three touching probes. I guess what he's talking about is the lunar probes. When they touched, the lights went on.
Yeah.
Remember, there was only 3 of them, and in those images that we showed in the last video, there were 4 of them. So I wonder what's with that. Anyone want to take a shot at that one?
You mean you talking about the contact probes when they contacted lunar surface, and then it indicates that they're X amount
Right.
of. Is that what you're talking about?
Yes.
Yeah, no, that's the first. Well, no, I know about that. It's the first time hearing this about 4 probes. I thought there was 3, but
This one that was 4.
is anything reliable with NASA right now?
The reason they only had 3 probes is because when you're coming down the ladder, that's the one without a probe, is that it could interfere with them stepping down, right? If it was all twisted up. That was the whole
somebody's
purpose
saying
of
they
that.
see 4, but I haven't seen that.
No.
I haven't seen this question before. Okay.
Yeah, it's because we had video. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead.
just,
Sorry.
I just wanted to ask Jared just one more point, because I
Sure.
just find this subject interesting regarding the Van Allen belts. Jared, have you done a deep dive into Project Argus? And I think there was also a thermonuclear device exploded in 1972. Now, how that artificial radiation would factor in with the natural radiation, and what would be the half-life of exploding those bombs? I mean, I haven't read anywhere where that was factored in to the official narrative when it came to the Apollo missions. I'm just wondering if you got any opinion on that.
Well, as a matter of fact, there was a controversial viewpoint put forth by Eric Chashon in his book, The Hubble Wars. He mentions that all these repeated explosions with the Operation Argus and, of course, Starfish Prime. Obviously, Starfish Prime left the artificial radiation belt that took about 5-10 years to decay. But then we also had the Operation Argus ones. Now, in his book, Chashon argues that the South Atlantic anomaly was actually created by all these high altitude nuclear bombs being detonated above the South Atlantic region. And so his premise was that basically that all this repeated nuclear detonations permanently altered the magnetic field lines over the Antarctic, and so now we subsequently have this permanent anomaly that dips lower than normal.
That's right. There was actually, besides the 3 atomic explosions in 1958, and then the, as you mentioned, Starfish Prime, the thermonuclear explosion, there were many high altitude explosions, not as high as Project Argus, but they were about 50, 60 miles up, and that most likely, had an effect. And that's never factored into this either. So I'm just wondering if there's any specific data that has been released regarding the background radiation after Project Argus and Project Starfish Prime. Any specific data?
I think Renee, you mentioned something about this in one of the appendixes of his book. I think it was something like actually, I've got the actual number here. Let me look it up for you. Hang on. You mentioned at the end of the book here. So yes. What was the numbers? While I'm looking for this, I noticed Jason Delano has said that James Van Allen changed his tune, and I say, yeah, you can have a look at that. I got a whole article about that on Ollis. Yeah. And I literally took the entire retraction, if you can even call it that, completely apart. And he said this artificial radiation belt was in the order of 45 rads per second. That was what the
per second.
Yes, per second. That's what the I'm not sure if that was for electrons or protons, but that was basically the reported dose rates for the Starfish Prime belt.
So we have Project Mercury, and Project Gemini. So was there specific data or instructions in terms of where they could orbit in relation to these 3 atomic bombs that were exploded, as well as Starfish Prime? Was there any specific data around that, like a no-go area that could be dangerous to the astronauts? Because there isn't a lot of literature I've read on that. Do you have anything on that?
Well, I remember Michael Collins has a section in his Carrying the Fire book regarding he has a bunch of tables about the radiation they received on their Gemini missions, and he attributes his higher radiation to repeated transit of the South Atlantic anomaly. But as far as Mercury is concerned, Mercury didn't have any ability to alter its course or anything like that. It was just, once it was launched, it was committed to this particular orbit. So I don't know the specifics about the Mercury thing, but I would imagine they would have launched it on a trajectory that would have specifically avoided this type of any type of radiation that the nuclear bombs would have produced.
Okay. Interesting question here from Alicia Banks. Hi guys, what would you say to somebody when they say Apollo was tracked by telescope, such as Jodrell Bank?
I would take this one. I would ask them, how do you know that they didn't pull a Zond 5 on you? How do you know the Americans didn't pull a Zond 5 on you? In fact, Jodrell Bank, they actually received data from Zond 5. They received the transmissions, and it was they detected voices of cosmonauts Pavel Popovich, Vitaly Sevastyanov, and I forget the other guy's name, but basically they detected the voices of all these cosmonauts, and the Americans, they also received these signals, and initially they thought the spacecraft was manned. And Zond, of course, is just a stripped down Soyuz spacecraft that goes around the far side of the moon and back again. And it turned out what they were doing is they had daisy chained the transmitter to the receiver with a jumble wire, And so they would they would transmit their voices from Crimea to the spacecraft, which would then repeat the voices and make it look like the voices originated from that altitude. And
Yeah.
they also used tape recordings as well. And that was all officially revealed. But initially, for the time when they first detected these voices, they thought the spacecraft was manned. And I'll bring this up because I know this will probably come up in the comments sooner or later and stuff. People like to claim, oh, the Zond 5, they also carried turtles, wine flies, bacteria, all this sort of stuff. Well, here's the thing. Not all life forms are equal. Okay, the life forms that they sent on board Zond 5 were what we call extremophiles, in this case, radio-resistant extremophiles. They can survive huge amounts of radiation that would have been lethal to humans. In fact, I've got an article right here, as a matter of fact. This is published by UPI. Here it goes. It's called Tortoise Blood Fights Radiation Sickness. They say something, where is the section? Here they go. They say the lethal dose required to kill up to 50% of a population of the species, the turtle, is 40,000 Roentgens, compared to only 800 Roentgens needed to kill 50% of a human population. The tortoise can survive doses of tens of thousands of Roentgens. So, that's saying that humans can survive the radiation on a flight to the moon because a turtle can is like saying that I can survive exposure to the vacuum of space because tardigrades, or water bears as they're commonly called, can survive it.
Well,
That was an actual experiment. They exposed these little microbes to the vacuum of space. They survived. Do you think we can survive vacuum of space too?
Well, what about this? See, we have this Casey Green. Now, he's a pro NASA fanboy here. And he claims that James Allen said that the belts weren't dangerous at all. What do you have to say to that?
Again, I can refer you to my article about where I actually took apart his quote retraction. It was which article was it? I think it was my column number 5. I think it was. No, it was column number 6. Column number 6. Yeah, that article is called analysis. Yes, that article is called "Did James Van Allen change his mind, or was it changed for him?" I took the entire email that he supposedly wrote to Van Allen and broke it down piece by piece. The first paragraph is a given. It basically says that what did he say in the first paragraph? The Van Allen belts do indeed pose important constraints on human spaceflight. No arguments there. The next paragraph is a bit confusing because he seems to be more referring to the South Atlantic anomaly, which that's a different kettle of fish altogether. The red doses there are nothing like the doses that you would get on a flight to the moon. The third paragraph, he claims that a human at a 1,000-mile altitude would have to receive a fatal dose within a week. I demonstrated that's complete nonsense. I actually took the data from the AP8 and I found that a lethal dose would have been received in hours.
Yeah.
Well, people change their minds.
Not 1 week. So obviously, anybody Van Allen's retraction obviously stopped it. Didn't.
But
People change their minds.
Fact check it,
But surely that retraction was made in an email, and no scientific person would use an email to retract a scientifically reviewed statement, which is his original publication in Scientific American.
And these things are sometimes
in an email. Come on, get real, guys.
And
it's never really, and it's never been. Sorry, go ahead.
So I'm going to say, Jarrah said that was he made to, or was he asked to, or was he pressured into changing his position? These things can happen.
I reckon it was something that he was coerced into making. And matter of fact, there's a section here in my article. I quote a passage. He was actually quoted in Media Bypass a few years before the Fox special came out, in which when he was asked about the Scientific American articles that he wrote, and he would say, "Oh, it was just popular science." Popular science is a phrase that university professors use to refer to. You got your peer-reviewed literature, and then you've got your pop science, which is basically articles dumbed down so that laymen can understand. But he usually we don't like professors. They usually don't like their students citing pop science articles in their reports because pop science writers typically are journalists. Then they have to translate things. Sometimes things can get lost in translations for the masses to understand. But this wasn't written by a mere journalist. This was written by James Van Allen himself. And so the question became, well, are you refuting your findings? And he was like, no, I stand by them. And so he would, when asked about the what he said about the radiation being deadly, he said, "Oh, it must have been a sloppy statement." Renee even spent time trying to get in touch with him as well, and according to, I've actually got the quote from Renee, what he told me. He said, "I used to write to Van Allen, and he would say, and I would say, listen, you're getting older by the day. Do you want to die with this shit in your conscience?" And now he says, "Well, maybe we made a mistake." Geiger counters don't make mistakes.
They will do this. I mean, we gave the example of Apollo 16 and the photograph. Every so often, someone will say something that it appears like they're responding to points that we make, or trying to refute points that we make without specifically doing so. So they'll say something that if someone comes across a piece of information, they will then remember this and they'll know that it's wrong. But these things are often false. For example, there's many examples. The Full Moon book mentioned the Taurus Littrow Valley and the Taurus Littrow Vista and stuff like that, saying, well, it looks like it's closer, but it's not really. So things like that.
I see a question from Jason Delano again in the chat. He says, "Jared, did you know the University of Manchester in UK holds the relayed voice signals from Zon 6? Zon 6 did the same thing as 5 with the audio." Yes, I've seen those listened to those audio recordings rather, and I've been trying to find the Zon 5 recordings as well. It's interesting that they did the same trick twice. You know, like the saying goes, "Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me."
Can I just like to ask Raz, Missy
next year?
had a question for you.
I'm seeing that.
Yeah,
I'm seeing that. I said that a long time ago that there was an arrangement between NASA and China where NASA said, as soon as we can land a man on the moon for real, then we'll admit the Apollo missions were hoax. And originally that was planned for 2025, but obviously that's going to be delayed. You know, we don't know when this Artemis will ever land people on the moon. So it's just a question of which will come first, the confession or actually landing people on the moon, and it'll probably come the confession first.
Personally, I think if there is to be a confession, an official announcement of sorts, it'll probably come after the last of the Apollo astronauts have died, because then no one can be held accountable. Nobody could called in for questioning along these lines and stuff. Their death sets them free, essentially.
Yeah.
There's only a handful left now. There's Buzz and there's a couple of others.
Off the top of my head, there's Lavelle, Aldrin, Hayes, Duke, and Schmidt.
And we just lost one in a plane crash.
And Scott, yeah.
Yeah, we just lost one guy in a plane crash. He crashed into the water a couple of weeks ago. Yeah,
Anders. Yeah.
He was on Apollo 8 and he came down in the water.
Yeah.
I see there's another comment by Jason Delano here. Van Allen's alleged letter is actually debunked by Frank Borman. It is clear in his mind was changed after the fact. Borman tells us that Van Allen did think they'd got fried going through the belts. Yes, in fact, I've got that actual quote here in my article. And I mentioned, he actually wrote in his book Countdown, Borman, he says the whole Apollo program made a lot of scientists look foolish, starting by those who pronounced the Van Allen radiation belt an insurmountable barrier to spaceflight. I've long since refused to take the word of any scientist as gospel. Back then, when he wrote the book, he didn't specify Van Allen by name, but during the 40th anniversary public appearance they did, he says here, interestingly enough, all the scientists and Dr. Van Allen was convinced we got fried going into his ionosphere belt. Some mispronunciation of the terms there. This, and now the doctors were going nuts. They couldn't decide whether or not they were going to abort the mission.
Yeah. M2M has come up with an interesting question, hasn't he? What do you say about all the third-party independent observations and radio transmissions from all that around the world that showed both Apollo after TLI, translunar injection, and from the moon? Okay, where are the recordings? Where's the evidence? You're just stating something. You haven't produced any evidence.
I think we just answered this anyways, because we had the Zon 5 as a proof of a concept. Just answered that in the previous question.
Right. And let me also say that that you have what's called the S-IVB, the Saturn IVB, which was an unmanned, what do you call the fourth stage, an unmanned craft. And that was sending out frequencies that the public could tap into. So they did actually have an unmanned craft orbiting the moon, transmitting frequencies down. It was called the S-IVB.
Yeah.
So that's if somebody was tapping into it, it was that one. That was the frequency that was open to the public. There was 3 frequencies open to the public, plus about 10 other frequencies which were decoded frequencies, so the public couldn't hear those.
I wouldn't put it past them. I really wouldn't.
Hmm.
Yeah.
You have to make
I
it
remember
convincing.
the MC. What was it? The some administration. I forget the number. What it was called right now. But there was one administration. The radio commission, something or other, whatever they call it. I forget what it's called off the top of my head. But basically, they declared it would be illegal to release certain recordings not intended for public distribution.
Yep.
Yeah, I think it was.
So here's another one.
ACC.
You know, here's another one, because in the videos,
FCC, that was what it was. FCC. Yeah.
oh, okay, in the video, see Brian Lawson. Now, Brian used to be a subscriber of ours that he's kind of changed sides, I think, because I have a funny feeling it has to do with Brian Pop Robson. Could be wrong. But anyway, Scott, do you want to grab this one? You know our friend Brian.
Let's see.
Why does Scott
He doesn't read any documentations on this particular thing. He's been going on this for more than a year now. He constantly refers to diving as being similar to being in space, which it is not. Okay. And of course, there are documents out there, and any medical journals will tell you that using pure oxygen when it's not necessary is toxic. And of course, he just likes to bring it up because he doesn't know what else to say.
Well,
There's
diving
no other
involves
thoughts processes in his brain that's functioning, and it's just continuous, same question over and over and over again. So that
diving
settles
involves
that.
very extreme
I think
pressures, but
there's
they're from
a-
outside. They're outside
Yeah.
the submarine or the diving suit, and then that affects the body. It's totally different. Yeah.
Yeah,
That
totally
question
different.
actually, I was just going to say that question reminded me of something that Renee had actually wrote in his book somewhere. It was in the Apollo 1 chapter. He mentioned something about pure oxygen at certain levels will actually cause severe harm to the recipient. There are certain limits. There's certain levels of oxygen pressure that are considered safe to breathe at, and others are considered dangerous to breathe at that can cause serious harm.
Well, can I
Now he
say,
claims to be a diving instructor. I see.
can I say something?
Once again, Brian, I will tell you this. Whatever you're talking about diving has absolutely nothing to do with being in the vacuum of space.
Right. Okay. So the reason is because when you're inside of a spaceship, what you're breathing is a mixture of oxygen and CO2, right? So you have the CO2 scrubbers, which are maintaining the balance between CO2 and O2. So there is no such thing as breathing pure oxygen on a spaceship. That's completely separate thing from scuba diving. The only thing that's similar to a spaceship is a submarine. And submarine has the same system where it balances the oxygen and the CO2 levels.
Yes, we've already put videos out on levels of air pressure, at which point, as you lower the air pressure down, the body is unable to exchange CO2 with oxygen. So even if you're breathing 100% pure oxygen, when you get down to less than 5 psi, your body's refusing to accept it. Simple as that, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know how many videos that we've done now on that, and we've showed the graphs, the medical graphs, everything else on there. I mean, all people have to do is go back, watch our videos, and you will see it.
Yeah, there are about 90 of them, so you've got a way to go, guys.
Yeah.
Jason
There's
says
over
There we go.
600. There's over 600 on the website.
Here we go. Here he's quoting. I got the actual numbers here that I was referring to here, 2.9 and 6.67 psi. This is a quote about by David Baker. He's basically saying outside of these limits would cause severe, if not permanent, damage.
Mhm.
So basically, pure oxygen outside below below 2.9 or above 6.67 psi.
Yeah.
It's interesting. There was a previous question about the SR-71 and was it pressurized? Did the pilots fly in pressurized environment? They flew at the equivalent of 26,000 feet, and they did breathe pure oxygen, according to the references in the description of what was being used on the SR-71.
Jason seems to think I misunderstood. Sorry, I'm sorry, Marcus. I'll come to that in a minute. Carry on. Sorry, mate.
That's all right. The equivalent pressure at 26,000 feet is 0.33 psi. So it's very low pressure. It's probably why they had to have pure oxygen, because otherwise, given the back pressure within the body, they wouldn't have been able to get enough in, because the back pressure in the human body is constant. And because we don't feel the pressure we normally exist at, 14.7 pound per square inch, which is considerably higher, they had to make allowance for that, which is also interesting because the SR-71 pilots were able to eject, if they needed to, at above 26,000 feet. They could eject at 80,000 feet, which is 15 miles up, because the air is so sparse at that level, it wouldn't have affected them. And you think if you're flying at Mach 3, which is over 2,000 miles an hour, if you eject at that speed, you're going to get torn apart. No, you won't, because there isn't enough air to tear you apart. So there isn't enough pressure. So 80,000 feet, there's so little air pressure that you need to have internal pressure, which is why they use pressurized spacesuits. Normally, the cabin of an SR-71 is pressurized, but only at 26,000 feet.
I have a chart up here on altitude and air pressure. 26,000 feet is actually 5.22.
That's right. Sorry, yeah, I got that wrong. The 0.33 is 80,000 feet.
If we can to return briefly to diving, the internal pressure of the human body actually can't be changed lightly. It's a very, very serious matter to try and change it, because divers who actually do have to change their internal body pressure for very, very deep diving, actually it's incredibly dangerous. I mean, they take enormous risks. They can't breathe air because it's poisonous and things like that. So there's no way that could be done in any space mission.
Okay.
I like this. So now we have James Lara. Hi, team. For Raza, China now has the most number of STEM graduates. What is the general take on moon landing, since I heard Apollo missions are not taught in China? What's that, Raza?
Right.
What's that about?
Right. So in the schools here, they avoid the subject of whether or not human beings have stepped foot on the moon or not. So it's not. If you go to like a bookstore, you won't be able to buy a book about the Apollo missions. It's not something they teach here. They just avoid the subject of whether that happened or not.
Something so important in history, you'd think it would be more widespread, but it has kind of gone down the memory hole a bit everywhere, I find. Certainly, my daughter didn't know about it like I did when I was at school.
Well, what about when I was at school? I mean, that was, 40, 50 years ago. I was never taught anything about the Apollo missions in grade school, high school. I never saw it in college. And this is North America. I grew up in North America. So an answer to his question is you can actually apply that to everywhere, almost anywhere. It was never a curriculum. It was never talked about. I don't even think it was talked about just as a matter of interest. I don't remember it in any way.
That's
grade school, high school, and college.
That's a great surprise, Randy. Because I was taught, for example, about the conquest of the South Pole by the Norwegian and British teams. I mean, Captain Scott is like a big sort of heroic failure in our country, and everyone knows who he is. And same goes for other very, very famous missions. The first, Charles Lindbergh crossing the Atlantic Ocean in a plane, Christopher Columbus, other explorers. We're taught that.
Yeah.
I remember being
Not
taught
our
about
first
the
steps on another world.
I remember
Yeah.
being taught about the
Can we just-
Titanic in
fellas, we have to just kind of move it along here.
Can I-
This M2M, M2M had one for Raza here. Has
Right.
Raza got any evidence to support the frequency?
Yeah, is it possible for me to share screen?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to share the frequencies, okay? Hopefully you can let's
Yeah, right down at the very bottom, you should have mute camera present down there. There's a little plus sign at the bottom, I believe.
Mhm. Okay.
says present.
Okay.
Well, you could send it to me and I can do it.
Can you see? I just shared it.
I think you need to
No.
approve it, Rob. You need to approve it. It's only the host that can do it, I think, on StreamYard.
Approve it. Oh, yeah, there we are. You got it. Yeah. Okay.
You
Right.
guys can see that now?
Yes.
Okay, so I drew these 3 red boxes on there. So this is just the NASA documents, which shows. Let me count it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
Just hold on a second. Here.
13, right.
Get it up a little better here for you. There we go.
Right. So I was actually wrong. So what it was, there was 2 frequencies which were unencoded, and there was 11 frequencies which were encoded frequencies. So if you see where I drew the red boxes, so there's the box number 1, and then box number 3 and 4, and then 6 to 13. So it says you have a frequency assignments for the command module PM, command module FM, right? So FM means that there was a frequency. This is not an encoded frequency. This is the public could tap into that. You see, there's a number, there's a frequency, 2272.5. If you tune into that frequency, anybody could hear that portion of the command module. And if you tune into the frequency 2277.5, anybody can tune into the S-IVB. So this was the FM frequencies. All the other frequencies were decoded frequencies. You have to have encoded encryption in order to pick up those other, what was really going on. So you had 2 frequencies which were available to the public, and then 11 frequencies which were not available to the public. Okay, and if you see the 2 frequencies which were available to the public, you had the command module FM, and then you had the S-IVB FM. So this was where the public could have tapped in to that conversation. So so nobody would have known the difference between the command module in low Earth orbit or an SIVB, which was orbiting the moon at the time.
And one last one here. They do teach the moon landings in China. Is that true?
This Casey guy, I think we should just ignore trolls, This guy's just here trolling us. I actually have something I prepared, to show you guys tonight.
And here's one for Marcus. How about the film emulsion? Well, guess what? We've already done that. How about let's talk to Bill Demos. He's the one that conducted the experiments at the University of Patras in Greece.
Yeah.
And their seal of approval is behind that experiment. And you saw what happened to that film when he took that vacuum level down to Torr 10 to the -6.
I mean, we covered it on a previous show. It's really quite extraordinary.
Well, he's just splitting hairs here, because the emulsion, of course, is in between 2 layers of polymer, right? That's what he's splitting hairs on.
And
Okay.
also, if
It's literally being sucked out between the two layers when it's put into a vacuum. Bill, when he's doing it, if you watch the video that he shot of it while it was in the vacuum chamber, you can actually see the mist coming off of it.
Yeah.
I think this is a troll question in the chat here. Sonic Jet, he writes, what are your thoughts on Richard Byrd's journey into Hollow Earth? Maybe NASA faked the moon landings inside the Earth's core. I'm a geologist, okay? I have literally first-hand experience, with seismic surveys and the like. Okay, we know that the Earth is not hollow. Okay, we have literally seismic maps measuring the. See, what happens is we set up a bunch of geophones, a bunch of seismic readouts. We can detect earthquakes from the other side of the planet. Yeah, we have P waves, we have S waves, and we can map the travel of those waves, and we can use that to determine. Okay, the mantle is solid rock, the outer core is liquid iron, the inner core is solid iron, and so on. And so we have this. There's no evidence that the Earth is hollow. In fact, I will say this, right? When they started doing Hollow Earth in the MonsterVerse and Godzilla, I literally got turned off the new Godzilla films because of that and stuff. It just literally took me out of the movie. There's
Of course, if the Earth was hollow, there'd be no magnetosphere whatsoever.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can I add actually that Richard Byrd and indeed a lot of the other commanders on the Operation High Jump they came back with an awful lot of secrets about what they did on that mission. However, this is not one of them, Sonic Jet. I promise you this is not one of them.
Oh, by the way, Brian, we did test the 168 film. So I'm sorry, it was the black and white that I put up once in a while, and you've seen just how badly that was fogged. So come on now.
Yeah.
And by the way, that was a lot of mucho dinero for that film that I had to get out of the States, specially ordered. So I've had enough of that. Done deal.
Okay, enough of the trolls.
Yeah, I would like to get back to what we were talking about earlier about being taught in schools. Because I remember, I don't remember we being ever taught about the moon landings in schools. I remember they taught the Titanic at one stage, but I was one of those kids who was more into the educational programs on television than I was in cartoons and all the like. I had like many books, even from my youth. I was collecting books, space astronomy, not just stuff intended for kids, but college level books as well. You see, and here's one of the books that I had back in the day, and this is the stuff we were being taught in those days. Here we go. We were being taught that we'll have men on Mars by 2019. I'm still waiting for those. I'm still waiting for those bases on Mars, bases on the moons, and all that sort of stuff. It also says
I remember being a child at school and seriously looking forward to this when I grew up. And in fact, any space fan from the '60s, if you could go back in time and tell them, by 2024 we still haven't sent anyone below Earth orbit again, they would be astounded and dismayed in the extreme, because all the science fiction at that time was predicting continuation of the progress that had been made through the 60s. So you are talking on a Mars base by 1980, journeys to the outer planets by the end of the century, colonies and interstellar travel by the early 21st century, things like that. And so you have to ask that question: why did this progress stop? We got to the moon and then that was it, and then didn't go any further. It makes no sense.
They always claim it was money to be involved, and no, it wasn't money. It's the fact that they haven't been able to solve the radiation hazard, and you can actually prove money had nothing to do with it, because the Proton rockets they used to launch Zond are still in service. There was even during the shuttle program, they had plans for something called early lunar access, where they would put a lunar lander derived from the Apollo Commander module, right, basically attached to some landing legs. They would carry that aboard the shuttle. They would use the Ariane 5 or the Titan rockets to send a Centaur rocket. The idea would they would dock in Earth orbit and they would send that off to the moon. They never got off the ground. They never went through it.
But you talk to people, like you talk to anybody, my generation, or you go back maybe 30 years or 40 years, you talk to people in their 20s and 30s. You mentioned Christopher Columbus. They all know who he is. They all know what was behind that. They were taught that in school. It's right off the tip of their tongue. you mentioned the Apollo missions. Many of them have to actually think about it. They're not sure what you mean. They're not sure, oh, what are you talking about? And then when you give them a little bit more information, they, oh yeah, that thing, that mission on the moon. So it's not exactly surprising enough, and I think the proponents, the trolls know this very well. It's Christopher Columbus is a household name. The Apollo moon missions are not. And when you factor in that we've been told that this is the greatest scientific achievement of mankind in the 20th century, you would think that that would be at the forefront of people's minds, but it's not. And I just find it interesting that it should be a household name, a household topic, and it's not. So when you talk to people,
I think the astronauts themselves are probably more of a household name. Like you ask somebody,
Neil Armstrong,
okay, name an astronaut. Yeah, Neil Armstrong's the only astronaut people remember now. It's pretty much mandatory to, if you're doing a alternate history or a movie about Apollo that fictionalizes it in some way. It's practically mandatory. They got to mention Neil Armstrong by name. But you ask them which mission he flew.
Yeah, and that's what I'm getting at, is that
Yeah.
when you mention Neil Armstrong, yes, that rings a bell. But if you mention the Apollo missions, that doesn't. You have to put Neil Armstrong first, which says a lot. It's because Neil Armstrong was really sold as, a household name, as you said yourself. So it's interesting that they need that name brand. They don't focus on the Apollo missions. They focus on Neil Armstrong, and then you tell them, well, he was the first. Who was he? Well, he's the first man on the moon. Oh yeah, that's right. But you still have to coach them. I just find that interesting that it's not part of the today's paradigm. Let alone like 40 years ago too. So I just find it interesting that we grew up in North America, and it's not a household topic.
Randy, as opposed to your education, okay, and I'm a little older than you are, so I was in high school while the missions were happening. My particular high school, the entire science department was just aghast with the Apollo missions. Right, we had a big plastic Saturn V rocket in the corner.
What's that music?
I don't know.
An ice cream van. Someone's.
Yeah, sorry, that's outside.
Okay, and so when I was going through high school, our science teachers were giving us all of the videos for like those MIT videos and stuff like that, all through the 60s and that. We watched all of those through there. Any update on the landings, everything else. We're sitting there. They brought TVs into the classroom at that time, which was a really big deal to have a television for a live landing or broadcast or whatever, right? Or a news media event that they were doing. That was brought in.
My parents said, sorry, carry on, Scott.
But that's opposed to what you had only a few years later. They're not even. You're telling me that they're not even teaching it. I find that amazing.
No, they're not. And I want to make the point too, is that again, I mean, it's not going to get you anywhere in life, but you think that there would be a credit course or a curriculum or a semester of it in high school or college, even as an interest course, but there's not. And I've often found that baffling that was never incorporated into any graduate degree program, just as a matter of interest, even in high school, but college too. But I don't know. I just find that there seems to be Scott, when you talk in terms of when you're in high school versus mine, I'm not that far behind you. So we're talking maybe 2-3 years. It is. And when I look back at the time, I didn't think about it. But when I look back at it now in hindsight, it's amazing to me that there was never a semester course on it, like even just one semester as an interest. I just find that baffling, given that it's, mankind's greatest scientific achievement of the 20th century. Well, they certainly didn't go out of their way to promote it.
Now that you mentioned, I just remembered something from when I did my astrophysics courses. Matter of fact, they only seem to discuss the Apollo missions as a class in an astronomy course when they're doing a subject on on the moon. Obviously, the Apollo missions are bound to come up. And I kid you not, I remember, I'll never forget this. Right, when I did my my course, when we did the lecture on the moon, the lecturer actually started the class by saying, I was very disappointed trying to find videos to present about the Apollo missions for this presentation because most of them were claiming that the missions were faked. And that was the professor told the class. And I kid you not, I'm just sitting there. Inside I'm thinking, if you got something to say about my videos, just say it to me, you know. But obviously I didn't speak up like that. But anyways, I'm just sitting through the class, listening to the stuff, looking at all the footage that he's presenting. And anyways, it got to the subject about the moon rocks, and he basically pushed the claim that the rocks are bone dry, and which that finally lit me up. And I said, how do you explain the huge amounts of water? They found up to 6,000 parts per million of water in the rocks. How do you explain the rust in the rocks? And he didn't have an answer for the rest of the lecture. He was glancing over his shoulder, trying to see if I was going to call him out on something else that he said.
It's incredible. And when you mentioned moisture in the rocks, water in the rocks, they actually knew that 40 years ago. And they knew it 50 years ago. But I have a book, and I don't have it with me right now, but I sourced it in one of my own books. That very point, when the proponents come back and say the fundamental difference between moon rocks and moon rocks found on Earth, there's no water content. Wrong. Even the scientists said that 40, 50 years ago, but it's not in the forefront. It's buried in the data. So another interesting point for sure.
Yeah, it's become sort of a controversial point among the scientists when they first find it's like they're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. They find water and in the rocks. They think, oh, there must be contamination. Later on, they detect, okay, there's water inside these glass spheres. They think, oh, okay, maybe it's not contamination after all, and they have to try to find some other reason to try and justify it. That one paper I found was trying to claim that it was delivered there by comet water. They said something about the hydrogen isotopes being different to what we would expect. Well, and I find another paper which saying, oh no, they overlap each other. There's no difference between the water that we have and so they say it must have been there all the time and stuff. And so they try to now they're talking about finding water and ferric iron on the moon. The only places where they find comparable amounts of water is in the polar regions. In the poles, you can happily get huge amounts of comet water, happily accumulating in the permanently shadowed craters. Okay, anywhere else on the moon, the water would easily be boiled off into space because the vacuum of space drastically lowers the boiling point of water, and so it's not going to last very long on the daylight side of on the sunlit regions much closer to the equator.
Yep. On the subject of the status of the Apollo mission, specifically Apollo 11, my parents, who were there at the time, describe it as being I'd say it was very psychologically and culturally significant. In fact, it was a moment that has been described like no other that they know of. To have witnessed it, it was almost transcendental. They had everyone they knew was staying up late to watch it. They had house parties and things like that, and they all came around with cans of lager and bottles of wine. And this was far bigger than, for example, a very important sporting event. This was far bigger than that, but it was forgotten very quickly. In fact, you didn't get that effect with Apollo 12, the next mission. This incredible. Let's face it, was a very, very frightening and turbulent and troublesome decade. A lot of people were predicting the end of the world within a few years. It was a moment where everyone forgot all about that and came together as one. It was almost a sort of Kundalini moment for everyone. But like I said, it was a flash in the pan and it went away. Yeah. Went away very quickly. Apollo 12 was completely different. It wasn't ignored, but it didn't have that same passion associated with it that Apollo 11 had.
People were more interested in seeing the football or Isle of Lucy repeats.
Mm.
Yeah.
I see there's a question for question here. My question is, how would the independents claim to be receiving signals directly from the moon as appears to have been answered? Well, yeah, we've discussed that already with the Zond 5. And in fact, if you go onto my OLIS articles, you'll find that the pictures from the Indian spacecraft, the Chang'e Chang'e 2 had discovered that at the Apollo 11 site, we can see that there is a three-legged spacecraft in place of the lunar module. It resembles the unmanned surveyor missions that the Americans had sent prior to Apollo. So this demonstrates that they would have used a surveyor-type lander to land on the moon and transmit the voices back to the Earth, make it look like the astronauts are transmitting from the surface, I should say.
And also, we want to talk about, someone was asking about the Russians here, and were the Russians also tracking it? And so then we have to be very clear here. You know, the Russians knew exactly what was going on the whole time. They knew that NASA was faking this thing. That was their agreement, because that was the thing, you know, that in 1975, the Soyuz Apollo missions, right? The Russian, the U.S. ships met and they shook hands in space, right? So that was their agreement, is we're going to let you appear to be winning. You'll get all the firsts until the final first, the man on the moon. We'll take the lead at the end, you know. So that whole thing was planned out. The Russians knew it, and it's very clear, because the entire time that this was going on, the U.S. was supplying Russia with the ability to manufacture nuclear weapons. So America was helping the Russians win the nuclear weapons race, while America was secretly winning the space race, so-called.
Well, yeah, you've been reading that National Suicide book by Anthony Sutton. Yeah,
I would like to mention something about. I would like to mention something about the Russians and stuff like that, because there was actually this section here in Alexei Leonov's book, which is actually kind of suspect. He mentions on which page was it? I had the pages a second ago. Hang on. Where he's talking about receiving the signals from the Apollo 11. Right. He mentions he was in. Here we go. He mentions he was at the Space Transmission Corps. I'm probably butchering this pronunciation here, Kosmolovsky Avenue in Moscow. Right, he says that they had all the space receiving technicians, tuned into what was happening there. This is in Moscow, mind you. Well, and he's talking about how they received the signals of them landing on the moon and then pictures of them walking on the moon. Well, all this received from in Moscow, mind you. That's a problem, because at the time of the Apollo 11 landing, and especially during the time of the alleged moonwalk, Moscow was on the far side of the Earth. It was on the side facing away from the moon. So how could he receive these signals directly, as he claimed?
No relay satellites in those days. Yeah, I should also point out: is it possible to consider maybe the USSR actually benefited from the Americans being seen to catch up? A space race is most interesting when it's a close. A space race is far more interesting when it's a close race. And up until then, the Russians have been getting the firsts in everything. It was getting to the. I mean, if it had carried on that way, supposing the Russians had got on the moon first, then I think the US might have just given up altogether. All that money would have. Firstly, on the US side, they wouldn't be able to justify so much their own spending. But on the Russian side as well, they would have had their own problems in terms of propaganda. You see, it's culturally and politically significant to have a close space race.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Like, I was just expanding on what Raza said earlier too. He got me thinking on this, and it's a deep dive, and we don't have time to go into that today. But I just want to mention that there was a lot more behind the scenes negotiations going on, in my opinion, between the Russians and the Americans, and Soviets actually at that time, and the Americans. I would even say there was a level of cooperation going on. So a lot of what we see in the surface is just that, it's scenery for the public. But there was a lot more depth to that in both the Soviets and the Americans' respective space programs. And I think one could argue, and I know Marcus has talked to this a lot about Apollo 13, and there was some obvious cooperation going on there between the Soviets and the Americans during that Apollo 13 near disaster. So it's something a lot of people will scoff at and don't like to talk about. The trolls, of course, will say you're conspiracy theorists, but actually it's starting out to be conspiracy fact. So it's something that maybe we could devote a program to another time, but just needs to be brought out.
It's good to do that, Randy, I think.
I think it should be
Yeah.
pointed out, though, is that I think the Soviets or the Russians and the Americans, they all seem to have a very weird on-off relationship, so to speak. One minute they seem to be at each other's throats, next minute they seem to be collaborating, and then the next they're at each other's throats again, like they are now with the whole Ukraine thing, you know. And the Russians are now deciding to pull out of the International Space Station, and the Dmitry Yogozin, the former administrator of Roscosmos, has been going around saying that he reckons there's no evidence that the Apollo missions were real, you know. And obviously this is just a former space agency guy there. Well, now there's also that video that's gone viral now of Putin being shown the AI detection software, you know, comparing that the Apollo missions and the Russian missions, and I think it was the Chinese missions as well. They said something to the extent of that the AI was detecting fakery in the Apollo missions, and Putin, he acts like very interesting, something to that extent.
He walks away, yeah, because he knew it. You know, if you're interested, I did an interview with Dmitry Kalazov on my YouTube channel. You know, he's a former Soviet Secret Service agent.
Oh, yeah,
you know,
I've heard
and
of him,
he told me a lot about what life was like back then in the Soviet Union, and so he basically the Russians were. What were you saying again, Jera?
I was just saying that I said basically they seem to have a on and off relationship, the Russians and the United States. One minute they seem to be at each other's throats, next they seem to be collaborating, next they seem to be at each other's throats, back and forth, you know, depending on the circumstances. And,
See, you have to.
I was just going to just see if I could just keep it going a little bit. There was another question here. The Russian researcher filmmaker guy claims that the Apollo Luna takeoffs are done by suspending a model upside down, including the camera, and then release the model and it drops away. Now, I don't know if that's the case. Can someone take that? Maybe Neil, because you haven't been really had a chance to talk yet. So how about I throw that question to you?
Okay. I've got a bit of a. It's a bit of a drop in kind of connection I got, so apologies if I drop in and out. But yeah, I've done a few interviews on a Russian channel, I think, a YouTube channel. So it's interesting in that people say, "Oh, the Russians would have, spilled the beans." Well, they are kind of talking about it a lot now. Yeah, the guy claims that the lunar liftoff filmed on Apollo 15, 16, and 17, where the module literally, I'll demonstrate it here. He claims that it's actually the model suspended upside down with a camera fixed to it, so the actual model is dropping away from the camera, which they did a technique like that, I believe, on the Wizard of Oz film with Dorothy's house, where they dropped the model of the house from the ceiling all the way down to like 100-foot drop down to the studio floor, which was painted a sky color, and the idea was that the house
Actually, can I talk about this point? Actually,
the tornado module clip, but I'm not set to land on the lunar surface, or what is portrayed as the lunar surface. And if that was the case, all those particles would also fall upwards towards the sky, which they don't. So I don't agree with him there.
Can I talk about this liftoff scene?
Think it's something that is taking off, but whether it's on the moon, I don't think it is. I think it's in a set.
Yeah, Neil, you're cutting out. Really
Yeah,
bad.
keep cutting in and out all the time.
Can I talk about? Can I answer this question about this liftoff scene?
Yeah, go ahead. Neil's frozen. Yeah.
Right. Okay. So what happened is I'm going to make a video about this in the future. It's a very important point. So the way they faked this liftoff scene was they were trying to fake the Helig-Jensen effect. So the Helig-Jensen effect is when you have a camera pointed down towards your shadow, there's like a bright light around your shadow. And they knew that this effect existed because they had sent unmanned crafts there before. So they were trying to fake this Helig-Jensen effect. And the way that they did that was whatever model they used as their lunar LEM, and they had a light behind that. And as the LEM lifted off, the light moved with it, because they knew that if they used an artificial studio light, then the shadow would get too small. So they had to fake it being a real sunlight. So they lifted the light with the ship. But then the problem with that comes is it's called the around the shadow. It doesn't become blurry anymore like it should be in the sunlight. So this is a big smoking gun here. You can tell from this lunar liftoff scene. And I'll probably make a video about that in the future pretty soon. It's a very important point.
Because that would be a bit of a smoking gun, because you do get like a penumbra for things that are
Right,
a long
and
way off. But you see that in a
Right. If
I would like
right,
to.
if it was the
I would
real.
like to add. Go ahead, Rosa.
No, I'd say he said it right. It's the umbra and the penumbra. When the ship lifts off, the shadow becomes blurry because the umbra and penumbra. So that's why you can tell this is not sunlight. Okay, if it's a light source moving along with the ship. If it was the real sunlight, the shadow on the ground would become blurry because the umbra and penumbra. So this is a big smoking gun here.
I just wanted to add something to that regarding how they would have made affect the takeoff videos. There was a website back which shared some pictures from the Langley Research Center. They had this elaborately built crane, which was specifically designed to suspend astronauts by the wires, to simulate the lunar gravity. They also had some models of the lunar module that they would lower and land back off to the lower and lift up again, I should say, to and from the lunar surface, to help the astronauts train for the descent and ascent phases of the mission. And what this website was arguing is that they probably would have used the Langley Research Center to fake the liftoff videos, to film those.
Yeah, but I think they also, what they did was, if you watch the whole liftoff video, it starts off, and then after a certain time, they cut over to a different clip. You can't see it because they did a really good editing job. But they used this a fake liftoff in a studio, and then they switched over to what could have been an unmanned probe, And you can tell this because in one of the video, if you watch the Apollo 11 liftoff, and if you watch the liftoff all the way up into space, there's actually a piece of the ship which breaks off and falls down into the moon. And hang
on a second. Let me just clarify that you said Apollo 11. I thought we were talking about the liftoff videos. There was no liftoff videos on Apollo 11, unless you're talking about the 60 millimeter reels from inside.
Yeah, different. Yeah. Okay. Previously, I was talking about when they had the camera inside on the later missions, but now I'm just talking about on 11. There was, if you watch it to the end, a piece of the ship breaks off and falls down. So I actually think that was an unmanned craft, and they avoid that subject. They don't talk about, a piece of the ship just broke off and fell down. It's kind of strange they wouldn't have mentioned that at all, but you can see it in the video.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to look out for that video then.
Another thing that I was always talking about was high-speed film cameras, because I used to play with them. And one of the very first ones my father gave me, and being our families in the film industry, a lot of them, but make a long story short, if they used a high-speed film camera to film the astronauts, to film the rover, to film the yanking up on the cable, if they did all of that and then you slowed it down, I'm talking about maybe 500 frames a second or a little less, because in a high-speed film camera, it would snap the film. That would be the end of it. And if you used S-Star film, it would break the camera if it, if it snapped. So it's tougher. But what I'm getting at is this: when you slow that down, you're going to get that nice floaty feeling. And when you slow it down to give you the 1/6 of the gravity, everything's going to look nice and smooth. And it's exactly what they did with that rover. And when people are doing it today, I wish that they would have those cameras, because you cannot replicate that in the digital era. It just doesn't work. It looks too fake. Because with an optical printer, you could do things with that film that you cannot do in an editor today. So a lot of that stuff, and all of that stuff, in fact, was all done with high-speed cameras and an optical printer. And that's how they got it so perfect like that. Well, not perfect, but that's how they did it.
Right.
Because I played around with those cameras before.
Right.
guess
That's a really.
So, but anyway, that's
Yeah,
It's
I
a
just
really
wanted to add.
important point.
I wanted to add to that as well, because there was a major discussion. You were talking about high-speed film cameras. There was a major back and forth about whether or not there was high-speed video cameras in the 1960s and the 1970s during the Apollo program. There was a fellow, he's dead now. He's a guy by the name of Collins, not related to the astronaut, I believe, but he made a video that went viral claiming that there was no high-speed video cameras in 1969, and the only disc recorders that they use for slow-mo in sports replays, they could only store X amount of footage and stuff. I did a whole video debunking this guy, and I just shared an article in the private chat. Maybe you could share it in the can I share this in the public chat? Let me have a look.
If we go to the private, see which one was it there, Jerry?
Yes,
I'll
I just
pop that up there.
Yes, yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, so I did this entire article basically tearing this guy apart. Essentially, he was claiming that first of all, let's talk about the disc recorder option he was talking about. This is where you have an Ampex disc recorder. You could only record about 30 seconds at a time, and you play back in slow motion. He was arguing that if you scroll down a bit, you can see what I'm talking about.
Let's have a look here. Let's see, he doesn't want to scroll for some reason.
You can find. Well, you can read about it anyways after the fact. But basically, there was the disc recorder. It's basically this gigantic drive which was supposed to only hold about 30 seconds of footage rather. And he said, "Oh, well, that's a lot. Well, the moon landing was much longer than that." And I argue, well, you don't have to restore the entire moonwalk video on that disc recorder. You could record the whole thing on videotape, then feed every 30 seconds of footage into the machine, and then copy that onto a there you go. You're going down. If you go down a bit, you can see what I'm talking about. Go further down.
Okay.
Go down, and there's the disc recorder in question. Okay, now go further down. Yeah, I pointed out that this disc recorder technology, right? You could use tape. Yeah, there we go. Up a bit. There we go. Yes. So basically, what I argued is that you could record the entire moonwalk on videotape. Then you could transfer every 30 seconds of the tape into the disc recorder, 30 seconds at a time. Then you transfer the slow motion playback to a second videotape, a master tape. Okay, and just rinse and repeat, and eventually you have the entire thing converted into slow motion and recorded on video. And this Collins guy, he actually acknowledged that was theoretically possible. In fact, if you scroll down, you can see the actual quote he used. There's the guy there. Go scroll further down. I've got the actual quote written down here. Yep, there he goes. He says, somebody says, yeah, that's a good theory. Whether you can do it or not depends on whether you can make 95 frame accurate edits between a quarter machine and a disc recorder. What they did have was a system of Q tones of multiple heads, which would enable frame accurate edits between those machines. So theoretically, what you're suggesting could be done. Therefore, a slow motion does give the appearance of low gravity. And if you can perform frame accurate edits between a quarter machine and a disc recorder, then I think we have to promote faking Apollo 11 from impossible to not bloody likely. That's the progress, right? Now he only made this retraction as far as Apollo 11. He doubled down on his claim that there were no high-speed video cameras during the Apollo missions. He claimed that the only color high-speed video cameras available. They came out after the Apollo program ended, but I tracked down. Ironically enough, he actually cited just the camera that they needed. If you scroll down a bit, scroll further down. Okay, here we go. Yep, that's the one. Okay, that's the camera. Yeah, he mentioned this camera. This is the VideoLogic Instar system. This was the first commercially available high-speed video camera that could record broadcast quality slow up to an hour of broadcast quality slow-mo. Okay, and he cited this thing, but he dismissed it, saying, "Oh, it was just in black and white." But well, I've tracked down a comment made by a passage rather from this textbook written by one of the guys from the VideoLogic Corporation. He specified that this camera could do both black and white and video. Sorry, both black and white and color high speed video. So that's the end of the discussion, right?
Well, it's interesting because the camera, I remember the camera that my father gave me, the first high-speed camera that he had. He used to play around with it doing family videos back in this was a hand crank. It had a big crank on the side of it, a key. You know, it was a key you put in and you wound the thing up. This was the one that he had, and mind you, it was only an 8mm one that he had, but it was still enough to make models. Like you could take models and just do crazy things with these little models that you have. And that's kind of how I started playing around with this stuff. But yeah, and he gave me that in 1970. He gave me that camera. So that's 1970. He purchased that in 1968.
Okay.
So anyone that says those cameras did not exist, I still have it in my box.
So, just to clarify, he was claiming there were no high-speed video cameras in those days, but I demonstrated that there was. This camera came out in January of 1970, right? And it was capable of color and black and white high-speed video footage. And so, yeah, there.
I have a question.
Stop sharing now. Yeah.
I have a question for Robert.
Yeah.
I have a question for Robert.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can stop sharing this now for you.
So this could all be cleared up in a moment if NASA would just let us see their original tape, which they recorded.
No, they won't do that.
Yes.
But they've lost it. It fell down behind a radiator or something. They taped over it. They taped the horse racing over it. Yeah, something like that.
So I have a question for Robert.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were talking about so in the movie Capricorn 1, at the end of the movie, they're filming him jumping out of the spaceship, the Mars lander. You jump out, and when they're filming it, the guy in the studio room says, "Okay, hit the slow speed effect," and then he falls down to the lunar surface slowly. So the way they did that in Capricorn 1 is they had some magical slow motion button. But what you're talking about is they used a high-speed camera and they played it back at slow speed. Now the question: at some points they did manipulate the speed, and one example I noticed of that is during this famous hammer and feather drop. When he drops the hammer, they sped it up to normal speed, and then they hit it back down to slow speed again as they were following. Right? Did you notice that?
Well, what they did was, again, the optical printer would have done that because they would have taken that and they would have done exactly what you said. But then in the optical printer, what they do is they add or delete frames. So you can add more frames, takes more frames away, and then that will give it that slow motion. And by the way, I did an example of that with Dave Percy's, and I counted out exactly the same amount of frames that McToon said that it would take. So what I did was I put that into my editor, and I have 5 different editors that I use. This particular one can do that, and you can go variable frames, constant, variable, constant. I mean, I can do anything with that, and that's what I did with Percy's film, and we got them to match right on the money.
I see there's a question from Mr. Orange Peel, another Zon 5 question. These tortoises and other animals sent around the moon, how much radiation can a tortoise take compared to a human? And what are the results of the autopsy? I don't remember the the results of the autopsy, although they did say something to the extent that they had no significant loss of appetite, but you can read about that. That's published in their document they put out. But yeah, to answer the first part of your question, as I said earlier, a turtle it takes about 40,000 Roentgens to kill 50% of a population of turtles, okay, compared to about 800 Roentgens to kill 50% of a human population. So yeah, these are much substantial. In fact, one of the other species they carried aboard the Zon 5 was what we call a spiderwort plant. You know what the nickname for spiderwort plants is? The living Geiger counter. You expose it to huge amounts of radiation that would be lethal to humans. All that happens is the stegmas change color. That's about it.
Can I say something about the Zon 5 also?
Sure.
So I've been following this, ever since 2001. What's happened on Zon 5, and the interesting thing about it is the official story has been changing over the years. If you've been following it on Wikipedia ever since 2001, they keep changing the story about what happened to these turtles. So originally they said the turtles survived, but then they starved. They died later because of starvation and dehydration. And I don't know if they've been changing the story to, but basically, this is pretty much proof that the Russians were in on it. The fact that they were willing to lie for NASA about the fact that these turtles did die due to radiation poisoning.
Well, I would be very careful about what I find on Wikipedia. In fact, as a matter of fact, when I did my astrophysics courses and also geology courses, one of the key things we were advised against was using Wikipedia as a primary source, because anybody can go into Wikipedia and change it, make it say whatever they want to say. And but even factual information is subject for deletion there. It's pretty much the Wild West over there on Wikipedia.
Or the Wild East, I think, will be better.
Right.
Yeah. Hello,
but they've been.
Excuse me a moment. I'll be back in a second.
Okay. Why all Apollo come splash don't wear their suits prior to getting off the helicopter? No suits were worn, except Apollo 11 wearing. I thought Apollo 11 was same as all the others. They were all in their little sort of boiler suits.
They had like gas masks on, didn't they? And it looks like hazmat
Apollo
suits.
11.
Yeah, because they were expecting to bring germs back from the moon, which might decimate Earth. That's how much they knew about the moon at the time. Not much. So, yeah. Oh, it's a good question, that. Why do they change out of their spacesuits when they get out of their helicopters? And they all look sort of clean-shaven or relatively clean-shaven. They all look, the hands are not damaged by the gloves, which we're told on Apollo 17. Gene Cernan said his hands were seriously damaged by having to go against the pressure of the glove. But when you see him after he's come back to Earth, his hands are fine, no problem at all.
Do you notice also how they walk normally from the helicopter to their quarantine shelter?
Oh, yes.
I know that astronauts who come off the International Space Station, all right, I know it wasn't it wasn't as long a mission. It was a shorter mission. It was still like a good few days, and astronauts come off the International Space Station are very disorientated. In fact, even if I've been in swimming in a swimming pool for a long time, and I climb out of it, I suddenly find myself in the air in full Earth gravity, and it takes a while to adjust.
Yeah. Well, when Russian cosmonauts are taken out of their landing module after being on the International Space Station, they have to be carried out and put onto basically day beds, sort of deck chair type things. I mean, after a couple of days, they'll recover enough to be able to walk and behave normally, but they're very weak when they come back. So Apollo 17, 12 days in space, and that rather unpleasant re-entry where they're exposed to up to 7G on deceleration. You'd expect them to be suffering a little bit, but they don't appear to be.
Yeah,
if your capsule has just been shoved out the back of a C5 cargo plane at 30 odd thousand feet, you wouldn't really expect too much of a problem.
If they really experienced that kind of re-entry, they could have broken bones or something. You know, I mean,
Yes, but the Apollo astronauts, being good U.S. citizens, were absolutely superior beings in those days. We don't build people like that. We don't have that kind of resilience. I mean, they not only that, when they took off right at sea level, okay, they dropped down to 5 psi. Nobody else can do that.
Yeah.
They didn't practice for it. They weren't even conditioned for it.
Yep.
And that's a
Well, here's
really
something else,
strange
Scott.
thing to happen.
No, but even in this, like, let's take a look at the rover, for example. Here, these guys are on the rover, all right? And they're working, and they're taking all these things off and on, all the equipment. And you know what it's like when you bump your satellite dish outside of your house. You just have to touch it, and a couple of stations are going to go bye-bye. In fact, a few of them will be gone, and you have to call the guy to realign the dish. Well, what about these guys when they were actually broadcasting from the television camera? All they had to do is bump that dish and just put equipment on and off. You see how that rover's rocking back and forth sometimes. They really get that thing going. And yet there's not one tiny little delay or fallout in that transmission. You see, that's impossible. And this is just like, this is one for Marcus here, Alicia Banks. She says, "Hi, guys. What would you say to somebody when they say Apollo was tracked by telescopes such as Jodrell Bank?"
Yeah.
Jodrell Bank.
Jodrell Bank.
Jodrell Bank, that's in near
Jodrell
Manchester in the UK.
Jodrell Bank.
They were tracking the Soviet craft, which was launched at the same time as Apollo 11. I think it was called Luna 15. And they wanted to make sure it didn't get tangled up because, you know, if they're going to the same place, you may bump into each other. Well, how accurate would a radio telescope be? And anyway, the Jodrell Bank they have two telescopes, a big one about 250 foot in diameter and a smaller one about 50 foot in diameter. NASA were using the small one because Jodrell Bank had agreed to track the Soviet craft with the big one. Now, how accurate at 240,000 miles would a radio telescope be able to determine the position of an object about 20 foot in diameter in space? Not very accurate at all, which is why you never see any film of it. You only see graphs drawn by somebody predicting what could have happened. And you see, Armstrong took control of the lander at this point. Rubbish. That was based on the radio transmissions, wasn't based on the Jodrell Bank receiver. It's not accurate enough. So
I would like to go ahead. Sorry.
Basically, they weren't tracking the craft at Jodrell Bank or any other station. No radio tracking could be that accurate. Visible tracking, possibly if you had a telescope capable of doing it, but there isn't one. In the 1960s and 70s, there was no telescope could visually track anything at that distance. Even the Hubble telescope couldn't do it. So let's get away from this idea that they were tracked by telescope. They weren't. Not visible.
In order to track something, you would have to have a Doppler radar. You can't track it with a telescope.
Yeah.
I would like to follow up something that you just said about the Soviets, tracking the Soviet craft. And yes, indeed, the Soviets actually reached out to Jodrell Bank to prove that they, to track their missions to the moon. And in fact, Bernard Lavelle actually went on the record as saying that they were reached out directly by the Soviet Union in the beginning because they had no means of doing it themselves. Times might have changed. Times might have changed later on in the thing, but in the beginning, they said they were reliant on Jodrell Bank to prove that they had these spacecraft sent all the way out to the moon. Yeah. In fact, there was a bit of a scandal in '66 when the first people to publish pictures from from the Luna 9 craft that landed on the moon, the first probe to land on the moon. The pictures weren't published by the Russians. They were actually published by Jodrell Bank. They had the Daily Terry, whatever it's called. I forget the name of the newspaper. But anyways, they print out telex machine thing hooked up to the Jodrell Bank receiver, and they ended up printing the pictures in the UK and publishing the pages, publishing the photographs.
It was published in the Daily Express.
Daily Express. That's the
See,
one,
everyone, I see that. I see that Neil has to go now. So let's just say goodbye to Neil, and thanks a lot for coming on the
See you,
show, Neil.
Neil.
It was just a shame your connection
Take care.
wasn't
Thanks,
better.
Neil.
Bye,
Speak
Neil.
soon.
Take it easy.
You're right.
Just one point about the
Okay.
Russian connection.
Have a good rest of the
One
show,
point about
everybody. Sorry, I couldn't contribute
Okay.
See you,
much.
Neil.
I got a choppy
All the
signal,
best,
but
mate.
have a good one.
Thanks,
No,
mate.
mate, see you around.
Okay, then.
Yeah, just one point about the Russian connection with Apollo. It is always said that Russia were much more interested in their own survival, their financial survival in the mid-1960s. And they have one major export commodity, natural gas, which we now know has caused all manner of problems recently. But back in the 1960s, they were developing their national natural gas export market. And in September 1968, before Apollo 8, they had signed contracts. Russia, or the Soviet Union as it was then, we'll call them Russia now, had signed contracts with West Germany, as it was then, Austria, and Italy to export natural gas. Does anybody really think that the Soviet government would jeopardize the creation of an export market for one of their main products by making some stupid remark about Americans prancing around on the moon, or not, as the case may be? No, they wouldn't.
Also,
And-
someone mentioned. Sorry, Marcus. Sorry.
No, go on.
I was going to say. Also, someone else mentioned here. It could be that I think it was Yom Omer. It could be that the Americans had some dirt on some Russian frauds as well. This is brought up in the Dark Moon book and the What Happened on the Moon documentary as well.
I think Casing brought it up as well a few times in his radio shows. This was the book by Lloyd Mullen. This was published by Science and Mechanics. It was interesting how in the 60s the American press was so willing to broadcast about the Russians faking stuff in their space program, and but if it was about the American subjects, no, don't talk about the Americans faking their own missions and stuff. That was always had to be some independent author like Bill Casing or whoever. But anyways, Casing he cited this paper by Lloyd Mullen, and he believed that the Soviets and the Americans reached this sort of agreement where it was you don't tell on us, we don't tell on you, essentially.
Yeah, they both had a lot of leverage on each other.
Yes, they did. That's the whole point of
Yeah.
that's what international politics is about. You know, if
Well,
somebody
I
is,
mean, you have to
If some-
consider the period East Germany. Okay, that at that time the Soviet Union controlled East Germany. So why was the Soviet Union given East Germany? It was just for the manufacture of uranium. So the U.S. were giving them that land to go mine the uranium, and the U.S. was helping them build nuclear weapons that entire time. So that's what was really going on during this so-called space race.
yeah, I mean, that whole Cold War was a complete fabrication anyway.
Right.
Just because Russia, or the Soviet Union up to 1945 was allied with America and Britain to defeat Germany, which they succeeded in doing. And the Soviet Union took their revenge on Germany by basically trashing Berlin. That was the whole point of it. And they were allowed to do that because they had suffered immensely from the German invasion of the Soviet Union. Nobody invades the Soviet Union unaffected. I mean, even Napoleon didn't manage to do it. Germany
So-
weren't about to achieve it.
So, but the main question is, okay, so if the moon landings were a hoax, then does that also mean the Vietnam War was a hoax?
So
Right,
it would
because
Oh, that's a who's
It's
asked
a horrible
that?
straw man. It's a horrible straw
Yeah.
man. That's what that is.
well, that's why
Right.
most people won't accept
Yeah.
it.
Here's
Professor
Raza,
Brian Cox said-
here's one here, right? It says Mario Brothers. He says, Raza, have the Chinese had any issues with your appearance on this show with us?
Well, these
Shows?
these shows are only coming out on YouTube and Facebook, and the China bans the YouTube and Facebook anyway. So I have to pay for a VPN just to appear on these shows. So they wouldn't be searching YouTube and Facebook for me and be worried about what's coming out here on this stuff.
sounds good.
Okay.
I should point out something said by Professor Brian Cox. He's said to be one of the most clever people in the country over here. He presents science programs. He's a particle physicist. He knows a lot about particle physics, but almost nothing about anything else. He said to disbelieve in the moon landings would be like believing that the United States did not exist, which is ridiculous. It's absurd. It's a non sequitur.
I have a question.
You need to keep. I was just going to say that you need to have like and like essentially, because the like if you're going to talk about denying there was a World War II or denying that this is not something that you have to rely on one government agency to prove happened to you. This was something that was witnessed by literally civilian populations all over the world. World War II happened in the full view of many people in Europe. Many people died. Many people lost loved ones as a result of it. Okay. Whereas with the case of the Apollo program, right, there are only 3 witnesses directly, the 3 astronauts allegedly, right? Anything else, it's happening so far away in space. The only proof you have is a radio signal, which, as the Soviets have demonstrated, that once again, okay, you can fake that using the equivalent of Zond 5, essentially. Zond 5 is the answer to all of this stuff. It's the proof of concept as to how you would fake a mission to the moon such that anybody tuning in to listen in would be fooled.
Yeah, which is why Frank Borman, when he visited the Soviet Union just after that, accused the Soviet Union of being space hooligans because they're
What a hypocrite.
Space hooligans.
Yes, he always was the arrogant one, wasn't he? What a hypocrite.
Yeah, he was on the Apollo-Soyuz link-up as well.
No, he was on the no. You might be thinking of Thomas Stafford. Apollo 8 was his last mission.
That's right. Okay. Yeah. Sometimes get it wrong. Somebody wants to know about the satellite dish question.
Yes.
You guys have
And
Well, satellite dish question. I mean, I've set a few of those up in my time.
Yep.
They're very, very fussy, I'll tell you that. And there's a little tool that you have to use to set the dish up. It's a signal. Basically, it's a signal finder. And it's almost like an RF meter. You turn the dish in till you get the signal, and then the signal fades away. Then you go up a little. Anyways, there's 2 tools that you use for that. It's a what did we used to use? It was a level, a round level.
I think he's
a level with it was a certain. Yeah, you, Jerry, you know what that is, don't you?
I was just going to say, I think he's referring to this question he posted previously. It says here, the dish issue is a dead to rights problem. I've looked at the elevation for different landing sites. I don't think the dishes line up. I'm still researching. That's what he says.
I don't
there.
understand.
Says,
What is the dish? What is the satellite dish question? I didn't see the question.
Well, I just read out the question. I think this is what he's referring to here. This earlier post that he made here, he says, the dish issue is a dead to rights problem. I've looked at the elevation for different landing sites. I don't think the dishes line up. I'm still researching. Okay, I think that might have been his question. Let me scroll.
Well, I think one of the problems with the dishes is it's going to take time to set it up, especially if you're on the rover and you stop. You're going to have to line that up. There's going to be a communication between Houston and the astronauts, and it's going to be in the transcripts, and it's not there. Okay. Not only is it going to be extremely, it's difficult enough to line stuff up on the Earth, it takes time for these guys to line it up. When you're at that distance, it's going to be you're going to be have to be so exact. It's a digital signal, for Christ's sakes, is what they're using, right? There's going to be a conversation on it. But in fact, all you get is a NASA sticker. They put a NASA sticker on it, and it just works.
Okay, but
That's
See,
all
there's
it is.
there's another post earlier by this Rumby fellow. He says if they streamed a rover driving at a distance from the lander, they must have streamed via lunar rover dish. The rover was not tuning, so the rover was not turning and not maintaining a signal. I don't believe they were transmitting videos during the time of transit, between station to station. I believe they would only supposedly they were only transmitting video signals at stations, if I recall correctly.
right, when they're driving, they had that little handheld camera, which is amazing because, supposedly Hasselblad put some kind of radiation shielding on the Hasselblad cameras, but those little handheld video cameras, they didn't get any extra radiation protection.
I'd be interested to know what that was that Hasselblad put on their cameras.
Right, wasn't it like
Yeah.
they sprayed on a layer of silver paint or something on the inside or something?
Oh, that solves a lot of radiation problems, doesn't it? Aluminium paint all over it. Why don't we use that here?
Yeah, that's actually disputed because the aluminium. I'll give you a first-hand experience that I had in my astrophysics course. When we did physics, they gave us a radiation emitter thing. I forget what. No, sorry. What they had was they had different samples of little discs. One would be an alpha emitter. One would be a gamma emitter. One would be a beta emitter, and we'd have the Geiger counter, right? And we had different sheets of paper, sheets of aluminium, sheets of lead. Basically, we'd use it to try to measure the amount of radiation we would be getting. I'll never forget this. Right, when we did the unshielded test as our control. Okay, we got X amount of counts per second when we did no shielding. Okay, now this was with the alpha emitter. Alpha is basically helium nuclei. Two protons, two neutrons bundled together. Okay, no electrons. Okay, now we did the paper test. Okay, the paper blocked the alpha particles, no problem. But when we took the paper out and we put the aluminium inside, imagine my astonishment when the readouts we got was literally identical to what we had when it was no shielding. So no shielding, we had something like a few thousand counts per second. Put the paper there, 1 or 2 counts per second. Put the aluminium in its place. Suddenly, we got an enormous amount of readouts. That's because when the particle was impacting the aluminium would actually fragment the particle into a spray of secondary particles, and that was what we were detecting with the Geiger counter. The same principle applies for the for spacecraft. If you have a heavy particle, a high Z particle impacting with the aluminium on the spacecraft, it will actually fragment into secondary particles. So you need to have a layer of lead or something underneath to actually absorb the secondary radiation.
Yeah. Yeah. Very strange things, these radiation waves, aren't they? I mean, we got satellites.
How are you guys holding up then? We thought we were going to keep it to 2 hours. If anyone wants to go or keep going, how do you feel, everyone?
Yeah,
I probably can go for another hour.
yeah.
I've actually got to go pretty soon too. But I
I
did
got to
have
sign
one
off.
little
I have
thing.
to sign off too.
Oh, okay.
Sorry,
So then
Jared.
why don't we keep it there and for today, and we'll come back next month and just have one a month, and
Okay.
whoever can make it can make it.
Sure,
Right.
that's good.
That's cool,
And
man.
just in the meantime, you can read my book on the subject, which explains how it all happened, or
Okay,
didn't.
and then Jara, you want to show your book, and then we can. I'll run the outro on it at the end.
Sure.
Yeah.
I've written a book, a fiction book, Trojan Smirch. It's currently in the editing phase. It should be out hopefully in time for the 2024 election. It's an alternate history thriller concerning the January 6th insurrection. It stars my fictional super spy character Sid Tanner. I wrote the Sid Tanner stories to entertain my step grandfather back in the in the 2000s, and he enjoyed them so much. I eventually ended up with 6 books in the series. He died shortly after that, and on and off over the years, I had been revisiting them, giving them a new draft and adding some new entries to the series. January 6th came about, and there was all this talk about how much worse it could have been. There's only so much I can get to without going into spoiler territory, but you can look at what people were concerned about. Many of the insurrectionists had guns, and there was, they found pipe bombs outside the building. There's all sorts of, there's so many ways this could have gone. And well, from all that talk, an idea came to my head, and I came up with this premise in which Sid Tanner learns of this terrible conspiracy between the Trump administration and the Russian agency SMERSH, which they have plans to a massive plan to help Trump stay in power. Here's the trailer.
Nice fun.
Coming 2024, a new era of adventure and espionage is set to explode into bookstores and digital retailers all over the world. Trojan SMERSH, a Sid Tanner thriller, written by Jara White. After an attempt is made on his life, rogue ASIS agent Sid Tanner finds himself on the front lines of a deadly conspiracy coinciding with the January 6th insurrection. Join Tanner in this alternate retelling of history that dares to ask, what if? What if there was something far more sinister afoot than what transpired that day? As a modern-day Ned Kelly in his trusty suit of armor, Tanner must infiltrate the riot and put a stop to the sinister plot before his past comes back to assassinate him. Such is life.
Wow.
I see. So sort of James Bond-like thing with the lady at the end.
So many of I'll tell you something. The publisher, they actually likened my style of writing to that of Ian Fleming and Robert Ludlum.
Oh wow,
So we got. Let's see.
that's quite something.
Yep. The UK had James Bond. United States had Jason Bourne. Australia now has Sid Tanner.
Oh, hang on to those first editions, Jared, because they're being edited at the moment, and they are sensitivity editors, and flicking through them to get rid of all the naughty words.
I'm aware. I've got all the original drafts of this stuff. So.
Oh, well, nice one, mate. Nice one. Yeah. Oh, I could tell you a few stories about Ian Fleming. He was like very senior in the intelligence services and was involved in all kinds of things, both good and bad, in terms of like for the sake of the country and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting character.
Thanks a lot. And hope.
All right, guys, then we'll wrap her all up here and try to keep it at 2 hours. So thanks everyone for coming. Thanks all for participating in the stream. That was fantastic. We had a lot of questions answered, and we hope to see you guys again soon.
Look forward to it.
I've really enjoyed it. Thanks for inviting me, guys. Thanks for inviting me, Rob. Great to be on the show.
Yeah, fantastic.
Sorry about the confusion last time. I thought it was 4 a.m. Sorry about
that. Okay, thanks everyone for coming. We're done.
See you around.
Bye now.
Bye-bye. Thanks.